flip
That's it.
side to pursuing big game or gathering more than they need. Anything they can't shove in their mouths right now will go to waste or be pilfered by beggars, who are unlikely to ever return the favor. It's telling that the most commonly shared foods for chimpanzees and bonobos are monkeys and duikers, a small kind of antelope they hunt, or the large jungle sop fruits at Wamba. These items aren't huge, but they're more than a mouthful. The lucky hunter typically keeps as much as he can manage, sharing scraps to quiet the begging and pestering horde. Even bonobos share jungle sop only if a friend begs. Humans are social foragers. We routinely bring home more than we need, with the intention of giving it away to our community. That means we have one another as a safety net. If someone comes home empty-handed, they won't go hungry. This allows us to diversify and take risks, to develop complementary foraging strategies, hunting and gathering, that maximize the potential for big gains while limiting the consequences of failure. Some group members hunt and will occasionally bring home a big game bounty of fat and protein. Others gather, providing a stable, dependable source of food to get through the days when the hunters are unlucky. It's an incredibly flexible, adaptable, and successful strategy. And the foundation of it all is the inviolable, ironclad, unspoken understanding that we will share. Sharing is the glue that binds hunter-gatherer communities together and provides the fuel that makes them run. It radically changed the hominin metabolic strategy. Sharing meant more food, more calories, more energy for growth, reproduction, brains, activity, all of it. Figure 4.3 in the bonus PDF. As my colleagues and I discovered in our doubly labeled measurements of apes and humans, Chapter 1, we burn about 20% more energy every day than chimpanzees and bonobos. Our energetic advantage over gorillas and orangutans is even greater. Those extra calories fuel our big brains, active lifestyles, and big families, the traits that set us apart from the other apes and define our lives. And it began with hunting and gathering, with early members of our genus Homo foraging for more than they needed for themselves and giving the surplus away. That extra energy propelled hominins armed with primitive stone tools and ape-sized brains across the globe, from Durban to Dmanisi and beyond. The metabolic revolution. We often discuss evolution in terms of physical traits, the appearance of new anatomical features or changes in their shape and size. After all, it's the physical traits that are usually preserved in the fossil record. But behavioral changes are often the true instigators. New behaviors arise and the body adapts. Fish started feeding in the muddy shallows of the water's edge, and those with the strongest fins and best primitive lungs to navigate those puddles had the best reproductive success. The evolutionary transition to land and legs followed. Horse ancestors with unremarkable teeth switched from eating soft leaves to more abrasive grasses. Those with taller teeth survived longer, as it took longer for the teeth to wear out. After millions of years, long teeth became the norm for horses. Which is why you can tell the age of a horse by looking at its mouth, to see how worn down its teeth are. A savvy move if you're buying the horse, but rude if it's a gift. Polar bears started swimming and diving to hunt, then evolved webbed feet. Behavior leads, form follows. It would have taken a very particular set of circumstances for sharing to prevail in the hominin lineage. The costs of acquiring more food than you could eat had to be lower than the benefits of giving it away. Foraging for extra food means less energy for yourself, more for someone else. Not the sort of thing that natural selection, Darwin's amoral accountant, usually favors. To the extent that the recipient is related to you and shares the same genes, their reproductive success is partly yours. But the discounting is steep. Even your child shares only half your genes. The costs of acquiring extra food would need to be low, and the payoff to the receiver really high for sharing to be worth it. It's easy to understand why no other apes, in fact hardly any other species at all, have hit upon sharing as a successful strategy. Despite the long odds against it, in a population of ape-brained hominins some 2.5 million years ago, somewhere in eastern Africa, the right combination of conditions, diet, and behavior aligned. Sharing became the norm. Sadly, the details of its origins may be too fine-grained to be caught in the rough sieve of the fossil record. Though if you buy around at the next Human Evolution Conference, you'll be regaled with any number of nuanced and complex scenarios. The earliest hard evidence for sharing comes from cut-marked bones on large animals like zebra. No hominin could eat a zebra by himself, no matter how hungry. And targeting a zebra, dead or alive, would require teamwork, either to hunt it or to push other hungry carnivores off the corpse. Teamwork pays only if there's an agreement to share the spoils. Perhaps hominin sharing grew from ape-like hunting, with some individuals giving more than the limited grudging scraps we see with chimpanzees. Or perhaps hominin sharing grew from the sort of fruit-sharing behavior we see among female bonobos at Wamba. A strong case can be made that wild tubers, the distant cousins of the potatoes and yams in our supermarkets today, were an important shared food early on. Tubers are a dietary staple for the Hadza and other hunter-gatherer populations around the world. And they are calorific starch bombs, hard for small kids to dig from the ground, but easy enough to harvest in surplus for adults. Just as orangutan mothers tend to share foods that are hard for young offspring to get, hominin mothers or fathers could have made a habit of feeding tubers to their kids. Perhaps older females, past their childbearing years, began to channel their maternal efforts into sharing food with their daughters and grandchildren. Whether it was meat, plant foods, or some combination, this strange act of foraging for others had profound consequences for hominin evolution. Sharing meant more energy for life's essential tasks. Survival and reproduction, the currencies of natural selection, improved. The sharing hominins and their kin outcompeted their less generous neighbors. We are the descendants of these early sharing hominins. Over time, hominin physiology responded to this new behavior, ramping up metabolic rates to take advantage of the extra calories. This was the metabolic revolution, figure 4.3 in the bonus PDF, and it has shaped the evolution of our genus, Homo, ever since. Positive feedback and virtuous cycles. Just as your metabolism reflects the orchestrated activities of all of your body's systems working together, the metabolic revolution changed every aspect of our physiology. Since calories don't fossilize, it's difficult to dissect which changes came first. The first sign of metabolic acceleration that we see in the fossil record is an increase in brain size. Brains are metabolically expensive organs, as we discussed in the last chapter. By 2 million years ago, not long after the earliest cut-marked bones, we find fossil hominins with brains nearly 20% larger, consuming 20% more calories than their Australopithecus predecessors. The fact that evolution favored channeling those extra calories into expensive brains says a lot about the metabolic strategy of our genus. Normally, we'd expect evolution to favor spending those calories directly on survival and reproduction. After all, reproductive success, the number of surviving offspring produced, is the only measure that natural selection pays attention to. There's no evolutionary benefit to investing resources in brains or any other feature unless it pays off in more babies. The caloric investment in brains tells us that cognitive sophistication was so critically important for those hominins that it was worth spending precious calories on more brain power. Physical activity must have increased substantially as well. Relying on meat for a good portion of the diet requires a lot of work each day to get food. compared to plant foods, game animals are spread thin on the landscape and are much harder to hunt down. Modern carnivores on the African savanna typically cover 4 times more ground each day than the herbivores thereafter. The transition to hunting early in our genus would have required a similar increase in the daily distance traveled, and it might have meant more than just a lot of walking. Dan Lieberman, my PhD advisor at Harvard, and Dennis Bramble have made a compelling case that early members of the genus Homo were adapted for endurance running, wearing down their prey under the hot African sun until they collapsed. Regardless of how they hunted, hominins had embarked on a high-energy strategy, hunting and gathering, spending lots of calories on intellect and effort with the expectation of even greater shared returns. The strategy worked. Populations grew and ranges expanded. Homo erectus, the first hominin species to go global, appears in East Africa nearly 2 million years ago and quickly spreads out across the Old World. Within 100,000 years, its range extended from southern Africa through central Eurasia and all the way to East Asia, with stone tools recovered in China and fossils as far away as Indonesia. Hunting and gathering had hit its stride. Incredibly, unfathomable eons hence, their descendants would pluck the remains of a handful of these hardy pioneers from the soil of Dmanisi. Sharing, smarts, and stamina, the key ingredients of hominin cooperative foraging, were a potent combination. Greater brain power improved our ancestors' capacity to locate and procure the best fruits, tubers, and game, while simultaneously improving their abilities to plan and scheme together. Greater endurance allowed them to cast a wider net, hunting down prey and exploiting the bounties of a much larger home range. And sharing, like the Big Lebowski's rug, tied it all together. With the newfound capacity to acquire more food than they needed, and the social contract to share the surplus, hominins found themselves awash in energy. It was such a winning strategy that the only way to beat it was to do it better. Each generation, there would be variation among individuals in their cognitive ability, social sophistication, and physical endurance. In each generation, the smartest, fittest, and friendliest individuals were the ones who tended to survive the best and reproduce the most. An arms race developed within the hominin lineage, the early incipient changes snowballing into an ever more grotesque species, with big bulbous heads, delicate faces, and hairless, sweaty bodies. Species more and more like us. The increase in intelligence is the easiest to track in the fossil and archaeological record. Fossilized skulls like those at Dmanisi enable us to track the growth in brain size, a rough though reasonable measure of intelligence when we compare across species. In less than 2 million years, brain size triples in the genus Homo, steadily expanding like muffins in the oven. Figure 4.1 in the bonus PDF. Stone tool sophistication increases in parallel. The early tools from places like Dmanisi are simple, broken cobbles, with all the beauty and sophistication of a first grader's clay flower vase for mom. By 1.5 million years, hominins were making symmetrical, tear-shaped hand axes, which are tricky to make. I can't do it, but my buddies who are into stone tools can. By 400,000 years ago, hominins were using complex, multi-step Levallois processes to make long, thin blades and other incredible tools. Stuff so complicated that you have to be a level 7 archaeology nerd with years of experience to make it today. Tools get only more intricate from there, their sophistication growing in an unbroken chain of innovation, from Paleolithic obsidian blades to the bow and arrow to the smartphone in your pocket. It's not only the tools, of course. By 500,000 years ago, hominins are controlling fire. This breakthrough may have come a good deal earlier. Debate on the subject is heated. Language abilities must have been developing throughout this period as well, though it is fiendishly difficult to track its evolution. By the time our species, Homo sapiens, emerges in Africa around 300,000 years ago, trade networks for highly prized raw materials stretch for miles, and natural red pigments are being used for decoration and perhaps symbolic art. By 130,000 years ago, if not earlier, humans along the coast of southern Africa were harvesting shellfish on an annual schedule, paying attention to the seasons and the tides to get the best catch. Our species expands out of Africa and into Eurasia around 120,000 years ago, echoing the earlier waves of Homo erectus, bringing art and innovation wherever we go. By 40,000 years ago, we're painting lurid murals on cave walls from Bordeaux to Borneo. Reconstructing hominin cognitive evolution is relatively easy because brain size and the tools, art, and the other stuff we make leaves a trail of breadcrumbs in the fossil and archaeological records. It's more challenging to track the pace of evolutionary change in fitness and friendliness because neither leave much definitive hard evidence behind. What we can say with certainty is that humans today are far and away the best endurance athletes among all living apes. Our VO2 max, a common measure of peak aerobic power, see Chapter 8, is at least 4 times that of chimpanzees. We carry more muscle in our legs, though less in our arms than our ribs, and we have a much greater proportion of fatigue-resistant, slow-twitch muscles. Our blood holds more hemoglobin to carry oxygen to working muscle, and our naked, sweaty skin, by far the sweatiest on the planet, keeps us cool, protecting us from overheating even when exercising in hot conditions. All of this allows us to go farther and faster than any of the other apes. Chimpanzees travel less than 2 miles per day on average. Other apes are even lazier. Humans, particularly hunter-gatherers like the Hadza, walk 5 times farther each day. People run marathons for fun. We are built for intense all-day activity. Many of the anatomical traits that help make us such prodigious performers, like our long legs, the springy arches in our feet, and our short toes, are present in early home, suggesting our endurance abilities were present fairly early in our genus and have been honed by evolution as we learned the hunting and gathering strategy over the past 2 million years. It's a similar story for sharing. Hard evidence of butchered zebra and other big game at sites like Dmanisi tells us that sharing was established early in our genus. In fact, as I've argued previously, sharing is probably the key behavioral innovation that sparks the evolution of our genus Homo. But it's difficult to track the degree or amount of sharing, as it changes over time from then until now. Still, there are some suggestive clues. By at least 400,000 years ago, tool technology and hunting techniques were quite sophisticated. In addition to deadly stone tools, they were making well-balanced spears with fire-hardened tips, and regularly taking down wild horses and other big game. Such dedication to crafting tools and developing hunting strategies indicates perhaps that some community members specialized in hunting while others focused on gathering, similar to most hunter-gatherer populations today. Division of labor like that needs a strong commitment to sharing to make it work. Brain size and behavioral complexity offer another clue about sharing. Enormous brains and a behavioral strategy dependent on learning means that we come into the world at birth as helpless, useless, damp bundles of pudge. We can't walk, talk, feed ourselves, or keep out of danger for years after we're born. Instead, we are completely reliant on others, on sharing, for the food, attention, and safety we desperately need. We spend the first decade or 2 of our lives soaking up the shared resources of generous community members, learning, one hopes, to be a functioning, productive adult. Our brains burn so much energy on learning, building, and pruning neural connections as information floods in, that our body's growth slows down during the early elementary school years. In hunting and gathering societies like the Hadza, people don't become self-sufficient, acquiring enough food to feed themselves until late in their teenage years. The payoff for all this waiting and learning is incredibly high adult productivity. Adult hunter-gatherers, both men and women, can easily bring home thousands of extra food kilocalories per day, far more than they need for themselves. See Chapter 9. This is the extra energy that fuels our faster metabolic engines and greater daily energy expenditures. The extra energy is shared with children as well as with their moms and other caregivers. In fact, because the energetic burden of reproduction is shared, with moms getting lots of help, mothers in hunter-gatherer societies typically have a kid about every 3 years, a much faster pace than that of ape mothers who do all the work themselves. Average interbirth intervals for chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans are 5 years or longer. It's the human life history paradox. Each kid takes longer to grow up, but we still manage to reproduce faster than our ape relatives. And it's our commitment to sharing and unique metabolic strategy that make it work. Brain size creeps up into the low end of the modern human range by about 700,000 years ago, in a species called Homo heidelbergensis that is found throughout Africa and Eurasia. Their big brains and technological sophistication suggest that long childhoods and super productive adult foraging was established well before our particular species, Homo sapiens, evolved in Africa. Likewise, their big, expensive brains and hunter-gatherer lifestyles tell us they likely had the same accelerated metabolic